These are something else. Just barely rideable.
The Western Larch is a deciduous conifer native to the mountains of North America, reaching heights of 98 to 197 feet with a trunk up to 5 feet in diameter at its largest. Examples of the Western Larch can be found throughout the harsher environments of the Cascade Mountain range of Oregon and Washington. This particular specimen was found on the east side of Mount Hood on 8 Mile Point, along the 15-mile trail not far from the intersection with the Lookout Mountain Trail. Okay, so I'm low-key obsessed with the fact that there are deciduous conifers. I think it's like just the coolest thing. We came to ride Lookout Mountain to see the larches in fall, and we got what we came for. You should come ride the 44 trails in fall as well to see the larches. One of the best ways to experience the larch madness on 44 trails in the fall is to shuttle from the top of Lookout Mountain Trail to Surveyors Ridge, then down the Oakridge Trail for a one-sandwich 22-mile ride with about 1,500 feet of climbing. Bring an extra snack just in case you waste a lot of time gawking at the views, because you might waste a lot of time gawking at views. You know what's not a waste of time? Navigating to patreon.com/voiceovertrails to toss me some support. That's what. Making these reviews does take time and requires me to keep my equipment updated, but you can help me out by navigating to Patreon and supporting me at a level that seems appropriate for what you get out of this channel. We started out by parking at the bottom of the Oakridge Trail, which can be accessed by driving north of Hood River until arriving at Smulin Drive. Smulin Drive? I don't know. It's Smulin Drive, where we took a left off Highway 35, following it for a little distance until arriving at the trailhead on the left. The trailhead itself is in a nice little spot kind of here in the Hood River Valley, which has gorgeous views of Mount Hood all the way up and would be a great place to do a winery or brewery tour or something. I don't know. From the Oakridge trailhead, turn left onto Highway 35 and drive a few miles south to the intersection with the eponymous 44 Road, from which the 44 trails get their name. After a mile or so on the 44 Road, you'll pass the Dog Mountain trailhead and see Lookout Mountain Road on your right. Drive up Lookout Mountain Road, which is it's a moderately rough and washboarded road. It's rough. You'll feel it for about 2.5 miles, and then take a left at this intersection. There's parking spaces down the road and to the left. The elevation here is around 5,500 feet, so it's very probable that one might experience snow upon arriving here in the fall. So just keep that in mind, as this is the best season to see the larches, but that kind of window when you can get up here, that window closes fast. You'll coast down the road for a ways before arriving here at the top of the Lookout Mountain Trail. The Lookout Mountain Trail starts kind of flat and wide, but really that's just a warm-up. It's only pedally downhill like this for the first half mile or so before it actually freshens up and becomes more just downhill. This surface was pretty blown out during this ride in mid-October, which makes sense. It had been a long season. Once this trail gets going, it actually gets kind of steep with some tight turns. They're really tight. It's the type of trail that's meant to slow you down and make you think while you ride your bike. I kind of felt like I was on the bleeding edge of control during this entire descent. The dirt is east side of Mount Hood, kind of sandy moon dust stuff that sort of doesn't consolidate well. There are a few road crossings, and there are sections of this trail where you might just get to sail along. It's a really good trail for advanced beginner to intermediate riders to get their first taste of downhill with a bit more spice in it. I think this is one of the trails I rode the first summer I had a mountain bike. It seemed a lot more challenging back then than it does now. Eventually, after a bunch of swoopy, bermy fun, you'll arrive at this intersection with the 15-mile trail. There's a really good viewpoint less than a mile from this intersection, so even though it's a little bit out of the way, you'll definitely want to turn right. So pedal your bike for a little ways and eventually arrive at this flat area where we encountered some hikers they'd brought their cat along for the ride. Because why not, eh? The fact that some folks decided to hike with their cat isn't the most important detail here. The most important detail is that this is one of the best vantage points to not only catch a glimpse of Central Oregon, but it's also a great place to catch a view to the summit of Mount Hood, and of course, to see those all-important larch trees I just can't stop thinking about. There's this pretty decent view of Klickitat and Tahoma, as well as Lowit off to the left there, which is pretty cool. I always love being reminded of the Gifford Pinchot, my favorite forest, even when I'm not in the Gifford Pinchot. Then, if I swing the camera around, there's this fantastic view of Mount Hood, always and forever dynamic this time of year. I just love the patchwork the larches form. If I were a botanist, I would be able to tell you why the larches grow the way they do and where they grow, but I'm not a botanist or an arborist or tree expert of any kind, so I'll just express my admiration for the beauty. Okay, back to the Lookout Mountain Trail. Now, I'm going to fill some time just talking here because there's something I want to show you that just had me amazed. See, there was this dude on a drop bar bike that with what looked like 48C tires on it, who had started his day way back over in Zigzag. And he was using this trail as a connector to go, he was circling the entire Mount Hood. And he was planning to ride back up and around the north side of the mountain, then back to where he started. Not only was he on a fully rigid gravel bike, but he only got maybe a 20-second head start on me from the intersection that I started following him at. Now, just check out how long it took me to catch him while riding my patrol with 170 millimeters of travel. This guy's insane. He'd annihilate me if he were on a proper mountain bike. Anyhow, the trail is relatively flat for a little while after I finally caught that madman kind of just meandering through this 44 trail forest. Very classical 44 trail fun. As the trail continues, though, it sort of just starts gradually becoming steeper and steeper and just kind of gets more and more exciting. Right about where I came across these hikers is where it sort of really started opening up. But even still, it's for the most part just kind of cruisy through here. It's very evocative of Phil's Trail down in Bend. It's a little chunkier than that, but not a lot. It's a great place to come and build skill and confidence on the bike while still being fun for advanced riders as well. I still really like how the 44 trails in general are not built for speed, but for skill. The folks maintaining these trails could have chosen to make them much, much straighter and much faster and more shred-tastic, but they chose not to do that. And I really love the experience this creates. You really have to be on your toes, and you really have to know how to properly corner in order to get the most out of this trail. And even with that, for such a supposedly easy trail, it sure does sneak up and throw some challenges at faster riders. If you need water, stop at this creek here on this flat part of the trail and filter some water, because this is the last place you're going to find enough water to actually dip your filter in for the entire rest of this ride. This is the drier side of the mountain, after all. Eventually, the Lookout Mountain Trail intersects with the 44 road, across which there is a parking area, so ride on to that parking area. From the parking area, it's only a short distance to this old clear cut that has an additional grove of larch trees for your enjoyment. And of course, I had to get out the drone again and document this. Now, I wish I'd showed up to film this about 2 weeks later because the larches weren't quite at their peak yet. They were close, but they just weren't quite the bright golden color I was hoping for. There was still just a slight tint of green in the needles. Still, this was pretty cool, and an aerial view really gives a good idea of context. What I want to know, though, is what it is that allows the larches to do so well in this environment. They're usually known for inhabiting extremely harsh environments where the evergreens can't outcompete them, but what is it that makes this environment, that's otherwise relatively low elevation for a larch, harsh enough to favor these trees? Let me know in the comments if you have an answer, or you know somebody who does. Eventually, after about 500 feet of elevation gain, you'll end up here at the top of the next sustained downhill section where the trail descends about 750 feet to the next junction. This section of trail is twisty-turny, so definitely look ahead. The forest is thicker here as well, but overall it's still good old classical 44 trails radness in all the best ways. The tread might be just a bit and a half crispy in places, but it was fall, so I didn't really notice that. It's a pretty darn fun on your toes the entire time type of descent. It just has that really tricky feeling where every time you really try to get your fast shred on, it throws up a tight turn and wags a bony troll finger at you like, ha ha, you can't do that. I had a ridiculous amount of fun descending these turns. I just loved this so much. I had a great time descending this trail. The next segment of trail on this ride is the Super Connector, which was a trail the 44 Trails folks built to connect the bottom of Knebal Springs with the top of Surveyors Ridge, a worthy goal. Here's the thing about the Super Connector. You don't have to ride it. You can also just jump off over to the Forest Service Road like my friend JM is doing over here. The funny part is you can see the Forest Service Road the entire time you're on this trail. Like, to save time, it actually does make a lot more sense to just coast down the road, but then again, this trail does have merit if the goal is just to ensure you're riding as much single track as humanly possible. There is something to be said for that. Kind of. I don't know, it's not really my favorite trail, but it's here. It looks like a really long coil spring on the map. It definitely doesn't suck. Eventually I got tired of the Super Connector trail and I just got onto the road with JM, from which there's a great view of Mount Hood that doesn't quite show up on the GoPro, but it's ironic that the better view is actually on the road, not the trail. Eventually the Super Connector continues to the right off the road, traveling through this relatively fast, flat forest as it threads its way among some pretty trees and open meadows created by clear cuts, some twists, turns, and rocky sections, and overall just prettiness until it meets the 17 road right here. One of those overlanders that's passing us on the road had an entire iPad mounted in his windshield, by the way. I thought that was interesting. Across the road is where the Surveyors Ridge trail starts. Just right up the hill a little ways until arriving at this intersection and then turn right. The Surveyors Ridge trail hasn't really changed all that much since the last time I wrote a review about it. It's still an excellent ridgeline trail that's uphill both ways. It kind of sort of just does its thing, meandering through dry butterscotch scented nice woods along this gorgeous ridgeline. It's got lots of exposures to the east side of Mount Hood, just like this one, and that's why we come back to ride it every year or two. Now, here's what I don't get about this trail. Surveyors Ridge is not, by any stretch of the imagination, an easy trail. And yet, when I first started mountain biking, this was one of the first trails ever suggested to me. But it's not really beginner-friendly in any way. In fact, it could be reasonably argued that this is in no way an appropriate trail for a beginner whatsoever, and yet I routinely suggest this trail to beginners as well. Are we mountain bikers in the Portland area all sociopaths or something? Why do we all keep recommending this trail to beginners? I think it might have something to do with views like this one. I guess the thinking goes that if a beginner makes it far enough up this ridiculous trail to see some of these exposures, they'll be instantly hooked on mountain biking, just for the views they can access alone. I know one thing, and that's that this trail gets easier every time I ride it, and it's awfully nice that this is still the case for me. Maybe that's another reason we keep suggesting this trail to beginners, because it makes a fantastic barometer of progression. You'll know just how good you're getting, or not getting, by riding this trail multiple times over the years of your mountain biking career. So there we go. That seems like as good a reason as any to be suggesting this wildly inappropriate trail to folks who really shouldn't be riding it. So if you're a beginner, yeah, go ahead and ride this trail. Anyhow, the hardest part of the Surveyors Ridge Trail is on the north end near the power lines, which is the most comical part of the whole thing, because when beginners ride this trail, that's usually where they park, and that becomes their first experience with the Surveyors Ridge Trail. It's kind of a little bit insane. Also, the north end of this is where all the best downhill is located, which also means it's the most difficult downhill. It's a black trail. We really should quit recommending it to beginners. Should. I'm not going to stop recommending this inappropriate trail to beginners. So once again, if you're a beginner, yeah, go ahead and ride this trail that's too hard for you. So I said all the best downhill on Surveyors Ridge is on the north end of the trail, but on this ride, we only did part of that because finally, for once in my life, we decided to ride down the Oakridge Trail, something I'd never done before. Like, if you've ridden this trail before, I bet you don't even remember that you've totally ridden right by this intersection multiple times without even thinking about it. Anyhow, there's a pretty fun little downhill ride here. It's just that it's kind of tricky to get to the top of this trail without either pushing up it or doing a whole bunch of road riding or shuttling the way that we did. This trail descends 2,000 feet over about 2.5 miles. It's steep. It's got lots of switchbacks. It wasn't built for mountain bikes, but it sure is a whole lot of fun. It starts out pretty steep with a lot of like I said, the switchbacks. The dirt on the top of this trail was holding a lot more moisture than the tread on the Surveyors Ridge ride. was the day that we rode this. It's important to be careful and attentive on this trail, as there are a lot more hikers on the Oakridge Trail than there are on any of the 44 trails. This one has a lot of exposures to beautiful views, and since it is only a 2.5-mile trail, that makes it really attractive to hikers. It kind of alternates between being a fall line directly down the aspect, an aggressive bench, and a switchbacky nightmare. But my favorite thing about the trail is how after descending the first 500 feet of elevation or so, the forest starts transitioning from conifers to scrub oak. Like, what is it about scrub oak? It seems like everyone loves scrub oak forests, including me. Basically, this trail kind of looks like what you'd see on like the Catherine Creek side of Syncline, the Syncline riding area. Basically, any of those transitional areas kind of in that middle zone of the Columbia River Gorge. And like also parts of the southern Willamette Valley kind of look like this too. You really get a sense for being on the east side of the gorge here as the trail drops elevation into the Hood River Valley. You can almost smell the cherry trees from here. The Oakridge Trail is just on the bleeding edge of being a brake burner, as the elevation numbers do suggest. The most fun challenge while descending this is seeing if you can do every single switchback without putting a foot down. No dabs. I'll have you know, I descended the entire thing without a single dab. I just need you to know that. About halfway down, the scrub oak opens up onto these west-facing meadows that afford commanding views of not only Mount Hood, but a unique view out into the Hood River Valley. I probably should have gotten the drone out at this point, but I'd already gotten it out like 5 times today, and I was tired of getting it out, and it was windy, and I didn't want to deal with the hassle. So you'll just have to settle for this GoPro video of these gorgeous exposures. These views are seriously awesome, as well as the scrub oak again. The tread loosens up a lot here with a lot more rocks and loose dirt. The switchbacks aren't any less difficult than they were at the top. So you'll get to practice your mountain bike Pilates moves throughout, but you really can't beat the view, so it's worth it. We started encountering more hikers as we got closer to the bottom, so it's important to keep that in mind, as I already mentioned. Be attentive, be courteous, because a safe ride is a happy ride. Eventually, the Oakridge Trail descends back into the thicker Doug fir and ponderosa forests as it nears the bottom, and the trees can find some soil to root into. The tread also becomes much tighter and loamier down here, which is a welcome change, although the aspect is still relatively steep, and so the switchbacks are still relatively tight. This isn't a flow trail by any stretch of the imagination, and that's okay. There's plenty of flow trails just a few miles down the road at Post Canyon. This is what it is, and it is important to accept it for being exactly what it is. Riding this as a shuttle saved us thousands of feet of climbing, but it did mean that we had to put in a lot of seat time in our cars, getting up the hill, and then doing retrieval. So that's no fun. But Oakridge is kind of hard to do without shuttling something in some way. So what do you think? Did we do it right by shuttling, or should we do all the climbing the hard way next time? Let me know in the comments. Make sure you like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters, especially my Low Me Goodness level sponsors, Andy Sewery, Charles Kim, Damon Corey, Randy Relaford, and Ty Morgan Marbett. I'd also like to thank my Hero Dirt level sponsors, earning their mention at the end of this video: Bryce Ulrich, Heather Van Valkenburg, Jason Moore, and Pedro Cantarini. They are joined by this list of community-minded individuals who appreciate content like this. Now, get out there and go ride your bike.